Welcome to the timeline. The information here is compiled from each of the vendor timelines located in the Vendors tab. As a reminder, you can get to these vendor-specific timelines by navigating to the Vendors page, selecting a vendor, and then clicking Timeline. Let's start by adding an item. You have two options. You can hover your mouse between other items and click Add, or you can click the More Options button and then select Add Item from this menu. You'll also notice in this menu there's an option to import a timeline from a previous event. Importing a timeline is non-destructive. That means it will add the items you are importing without deleting the current ones. Also in this menu is the option to download the timeline, but we'll talk about that in a minute. After we click Add, the time will default to the day of the event at 8 a.m. To change the date or time for the item, you can do that by clicking into the respective fields. Next, we'll add an item name. If this item requires more details, click the More Details text. Another great example of when to use this would be something like a catering item, outlining the types of appetizers being served, or an AV item detailing equipment that should be set up. If you want to remove these details, click Remove. On to tagging. The tagging feature allows you to specify who this item applies to. For this item, we want to tag a location and our photographer as the vendor. That means this item will end up in the photographer's specific timeline, as well as the overall event timeline. Let's look at another item. Bridal party to arrive at Pinehurst. This item has all three tags being used. A client tag, which means the item will show up in the client-specific timeline, a location tag, which will associate the item with a location, and a vendor tag, which will cause this item to show up in the Mandy and Alyssa wedding hair and makeup timeline. If you do the tagging work when you add items, sorting becomes incredibly easy. To sort or filter items, click the Filter button at the top of the page. This allows you to quickly show timeline items that only apply to specific people, whether it be a client, all of the vendors, or a custom mix of people. Say we sort the timeline to just show our photographer. Now we will only see the items associated with the photographer. If you want to export these specific items, click the More Options button and click Download Event Timeline. Whatever filters you have applied to your timeline is the timeline that will show up in the exported PDF. In this case, only items with the photographer tag will be exported if you export the timeline from this page. If you were to download the timeline from the dashboard, it will export all of this event's timeline information, which includes the overall event timeline, a timeline for your client, and a timeline for each vendor. If you need to consolidate your timeline so it's easier to read, click the Show Details toggle located in the top right-hand corner. This makes it easier to navigate around without seeing all of the nitty-gritty details. Lastly, let's cover bulk actions. There are two bulk actions you can apply: delete and time shift. If you don't want to hit the trash can dozens of times on the right, you can select the items and click the trash can in the menu that pops up at the top of the page. Time shift allows you to move items if, say, the date of an event changes, or if there's a delay and you need to push everything back by a given amount of time. And that wraps up our tutorial for the timeline. Thank you for watching the Oro Explainer series.